My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and for the last 7 years, I played the role of a quiet, unassuming freelance copywriter. My husband slammed the divorce papers onto our dining table and laughed right in my face. "Sign it," he sneered, sliding a cheap plastic pen across the custom mahogany wood. "You will get your rusty old car and $5,000, which is incredibly generous for a freeloader." He honestly believed I was financially powerless and would end up begging on the streets. But he had no idea that his arrogant smirk would completely vanish the moment a judge read my actual net worth out loud in a crowded courtroom. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had a partner or family member underestimate your worth and treat you like a burden. Trust me, you are going to want to hear exactly how I dismantled his entire life, piece by piece. It was our 7th wedding anniversary. I had spent the afternoon preparing a ribeye roast and setting the table with our expensive china. The house we lived in was a stunning $1.2 million property in a high-end Chicago suburb. When Derek walked through the front door that evening, he did not have flowers. He did not even look at me. He just loosened his silk tie, walked straight into the dining room, and tossed a thick manila envelope right onto my dinner plate. "Happy anniversary," he said, his voice dripping with absolute boredom. I stared at the heavy envelope. I did not need to open it to know what it was. The word judgment was stamped boldly near the top of the visible page. I looked up at him, feeling my heart pound, not from heartbreak, but from the sheer audacity of his timing. "You are divorcing me on our anniversary?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. He let out a loud, mocking laugh. He pulled out a chair, sat down heavily, and poured himself a large glass of the expensive red wine I had just opened. "Why wait?" he asked, taking a long sip. "I am a vice president of sales now. I am pulling in serious corporate money. And you." He gestured vaguely at me with a look of pure disgust. "You are a freelance copywriter who works in her pajamas all day. You type little blog posts for pennies. I am tired of carrying you financially. It is totally exhausting." I stayed perfectly silent. I let him talk. He leaned forward, tapping his index finger aggressively against the table. "Here is how this is going to work. You are going to sign those papers quickly and quietly. The house is mine because I pay the mortgage. The cars are mine. The investments are mine. You are completely financially illiterate, Natalie. If we go to court, my lawyers will chew you up and spit you out. So take the $5,000, pack a bag, and be out of my house by tomorrow morning." Before I could even process his ridiculous demands, he pulled out his smartphone and hit speed dial. He put it on speakerphone, setting it on the table right between us. His mother, Susan, answered on the first ring. "Hey, Mom," Derek said, grinning maliciously at me. "I did it. I am finally taking out the trash." Susan let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed loudly through the dining room. "Oh, thank goodness, Derek. I told you years ago, that girl was nothing but a gold-digging leech. She has been dragging you down since day one. Have you told her to pack her cheap clothes yet?" "Yes, Mom," he replied, his cold eyes locked firmly on mine. "She is leaving tomorrow morning." I listened to them bond over my supposed misery. For 7 years I had smiled politely at Susan and her passive-aggressive comments. For 7 years I had let Derek play the big important provider while I worked quietly from my home office. They thought my silence meant weakness. They thought my modest clothes and quiet demeanor meant I was broke and entirely dependent on his paycheck. But Derek did not know that his name was only on the mortgage because I allowed it to keep his fragile ego intact. He did not know that the tiny freelance business he constantly mocked was actually a highly secured tech company I built from the ground up. I looked at the divorce papers again. The terms were absolutely laughable. He wanted everything, assuming I was too terrified to fight back. He reached across the table, tapping the pen impatiently. "Sign it now, Natalie." I stood up. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply looked at the cheap plastic pen resting on the custom mahogany table, then shifted my gaze up to Derek and his smug face. Through the speakerphone, I could hear Susan taking shallow, eager breaths. She was waiting for the inevitable breakdown. They both wanted a dramatic show. They wanted me to beg to loudly plead for my marriage, or to pathetically negotiate for a few extra months of living in a house that I owned, but I was absolutely not going to give either of them the satisfaction of my tears. I slowly walked calmly toward the quiet master bedroom. Derek immediately called out after me, his voice echoing sharply against the hardwood floors. "Hey, where do you think you are going right now? You need to sign those papers tonight. We are getting this over with before I go to sleep." I completely ignored his demands. I walked into our bedroom, pulled my small leather duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet, and began quickly tossing in a few basic essentials. A couple pairs of dark jeans, plain sweaters, my toothbrush, and my daily skincare routine. I purposely did not bother packing the expensive cocktail dresses or the designer high heels Derek loved to parade me around in. Those flashy items were merely costumes for a life I was entirely finished playing a part in. However, there was one specific item I made absolutely sure to securely pack. From the hidden locked compartment at the back of my home office desk drawer, I retrieved a small, matte black external hard drive. It did not look like much, but it was heavily encrypted. It held the master access keys to my software company servers, as well as the documentation for the private offshore accounts that originally funded my startup phase. I slipped the hard drive carefully into the deep inner zipper pocket of my duffel bag. Derek suddenly appeared in the bedroom doorway, leaning heavily against the doorframe, with his arms crossed securely over his chest. He watched me pack my modest belongings with a look of supreme, arrogant amusement. "Look at you," he sneered, shaking his head. "Running away into the night with nothing but a tiny backpack. I really hope you have a generous friend who will let you crash on their cheap couch, because my bank accounts are officially off limits to you starting right this second." He pointed a finger at my hands. "Oh, and leave the expensive jewelry here. I bought most of it, and I am definitely not letting you pawn it just to pay for a cheap motel room." I stopped packing immediately. I looked down at my left hand, where the 2-carat diamond engagement ring sparkled brightly under the recessed ceiling lighting. It was a beautiful ring, but the diamond itself was lab-grown, a convenient fact Derek had completely lied to his mother about to make himself look like a massive spender. Without uttering a single word, I slipped the heavy ring off my finger. I tossed it casually onto the neatly made bed. It landed with a soft, hollow thud against the expensive down comforter. "Is that absolutely everything?" I asked him, keeping my voice as cold and flat as winter ice. Derek scoffed loudly, clearly unnerved by my complete lack of emotional hysterics. "Just get out of my house," he muttered, stepping aside. I zipped my leather bag through the sturdy strap over my right shoulder and walked right past him. I headed straight for the garage door, reaching for the familiar keys to the Honda Civic. Derek suddenly lunged forward and stepped right in front of the door, completely blocking my exit path. "Where do you think you are going?" he demanded. "I changed my mind about the car," he said, a nasty grin spreading across his face. "I pay the auto insurance every single month. You can walk or take the bus. But you are not driving my property off this driveway tonight." He thought stripping me of transportation would be the final blow that would bring me to my knees. Instead, I simply dropped the keys. They hit the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter. "Fine, keep the car," I said. I turned around, walked out the front door, and let it slam shut behind me. I walked down the long driveway into the cool Chicago night. I pulled my sleek smartphone out of my pocket and quickly opened up my secure messaging app. I tapped on the highly confidential contact name for my lead wealth management attorney. I carefully typed out a single definitive sentence and firmly hit the send button. "Please initiate the secure blind trust unsealing protocol immediately." I spent the night in a luxury suite at the Four Seasons downtown, paying with a corporate card Derek did not even know existed. I slept incredibly well. The next morning, I drank my coffee-ordered room service and mentally prepared for the next phase. I needed to go back to the house one last time to retrieve my passport, my birth certificate, and a specific file of business tax documents I kept in a hidden floor safe in the study. I timed my arrival for 9 in the morning, assuming Derek would be at his corporate office playing the role of the busy executive. I parked my rental car halfway down the street and walked up the driveway. I unlocked the front door quietly. The house was not empty. I could hear loud, obnoxious laughter echoing down the hallway from the master bedroom. It was not Derek. I recognized the shrill, grating voices of my mother-in-law Susan and my sister-in-law Amanda. Mixed in with their voices was a third, higher-pitched laugh. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick hallway runner. I stopped in the open doorway of my bedroom and took in the scene. My closet doors were thrown wide open. Expensive dresses, designer shoes, and luxury handbags that I rarely used were scattered across the bed. Standing right in the middle of the chaos was a young blonde woman. She looked no older than 26. She was holding up one of my silk blouses against her chest, admiring herself in the full-length mirror. This was Brittany, Derek's assistant, the woman he had been secretly seeing for the past 8 months. Susan and Amanda were sitting on the edge of the bed, clapping their hands and encouraging her. "Oh, that color looks absolutely stunning on you, Brittany," Amanda gushed, completely ignoring the fact that she was actively helping her brother's mistress raid my personal belongings. "You have such a better figure for these clothes anyway. You will look amazing at the company gala next month." Susan nodded vigorously in agreement. Derek always complained that his wife dressed like a homeless librarian. It is about time he had a real woman on his arm to match his executive status. "Go ahead and pack all of it into those trash bags. We are throwing the rest of her cheap junk out today." I cleared my throat loudly. The room fell dead silent in an instant. All 3 women whipped their heads around to look at me. Brittany visibly jumped, dropping the silk blouse onto the floor. Amanda crossed her arms defensively while Susan simply lifted her chin, refusing to look embarrassed. I did not care about the clothes. I did not care about the shoes or the bags. My eyes instantly zeroed in on the delicate string of pearls resting around Brittany's neck. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Those pearls were not a gift from Derek. They were not purchased at a department store. They were an antique heirloom that belonged to my late mother. She wore them on her wedding day, and I had kept them safely tucked away in a velvet box at the back of my top drawer. "Take the necklace off right now," I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. Brittany instinctively reached up and touched the pearls, her eyes darting nervously toward Susan for protection. Susan immediately stood up, walking over to stand squarely in front of Brittany like a bizarre bodyguard. "She will do no such thing," Susan snapped, pointing an acrylic fingernail in my direction. "Derek bought all of this jewelry. It is marital property, which means it belongs to him. And he told Brittany she could come over here and pick out whatever she wanted as a welcome to the family gift." I stepped further into the room, keeping my posture completely straight. "That necklace belonged to my mother, Susan. You know that perfectly well. It has absolutely nothing to do with Derek. Tell your son's little girlfriend to take it off before I call the police and report a robbery in progress." Amanda laughed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please! Stop being so dramatic. It is probably just cheap costume jewelry anyway. Mom is right. It looks way better on Brittany. She is actually going to give Derek the respect and the family he deserves instead of just sitting around the house typing on a laptop all day." I looked at Brittany. She was young, incredibly naive, and clearly blinded by the illusion of Derek's wealth. She smirked at me, gaining confidence from Susan and Amanda's toxic support. "Derek said I could have it," Brittany said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "He said you never appreciated the nice things he provided for you." The sheer audacity of her statement almost made me laugh out loud. Derek provided absolutely nothing. The very floor she was standing on was purchased with my money. The roof over her head was secured by my down payment. But this was not the moment to reveal my hand. If I engaged in a screaming match over a necklace right now, I would lose the strategic advantage my lawyers were currently building. "Keep it," I said, looking Brittany dead in the eyes. "I want you to wear it to court." It will be the perfect accessory when the judge forces you to explain exactly how much stolen marital money you have been hiding in your personal bank accounts. Brittany's smug smile faltered slightly. Susan gasped in outrage, taking a threatening step forward. "How dare you speak to her that way?" Susan yelled. "You are nothing but a bitter broke, soon-to-be ex-wife. You have no money and no power. Get out of this house before I call the cops and have you arrested for trespassing." I did not flinch. I just stood my ground, watching them revel in their imaginary victory. They truly believed they had completely destroyed my life. They thought stripping my closet and stealing my mother's pearls was the ultimate punishment. But they were only digging their own graves deeper. Just as Susan reached for her phone to carry out her empty threat, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway behind me. The heavy footsteps stopped right behind me. I turned slightly and saw Jamal, Amanda's husband, standing in the doorway. Jamal was 34 years old, a brilliant black African-American man who worked as a senior forensic auditor downtown. He was always impeccably dressed, currently wearing a sharp charcoal suit that contrasted with the chaotic energy filling my bedroom. Jamal was the only person in this family I genuinely respected. He held a thick stack of papers in his hand. It was a copy of the divorce petition Derek tossed at me last night. Jamal must have found it resting on the polished kitchen island downstairs when he arrived to pick up his wife. "What exactly is going on up here?" Jamal asked, his deep voice cutting through the toxic atmosphere. He looked at the clothes scattered across the bed, then at Brittany, zeroing in on the antique pearls around her neck. "Amanda, tell me you are not helping this girl raid Natalie's closet." Before Amanda could formulate an excuse, Derek walked in holding a cup of coffee. He had apparently decided to skip his morning corporate meetings to supervise his mistress moving into my home. He stopped next to Jamal, looking incredibly smug as he surveyed the chaos. "Everything is under control," Jamal, Derek said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Natalie was just leaving. She is making this harder than it needs to be, completely ignoring logic and reason." Jamal did not back down. He held up the divorce papers, tapping the front page. "I read this garbage on the counter, Derek. Are you out of your mind? You cannot legally demand she leave a marital home with only $5,000. We live in an equitable distribution state. A judge will require a full, transparent audit of every single asset acquired during this marriage. You cannot just bully her into signing away her legal rights." Derek rolled his eyes, letting out a condescending sigh. He stepped closer to Jamal, his tone shifting into that familiar, arrogant cadence he used to put people in their place. "Listen, Jamal, I know you think your little accounting degree makes you a legal expert, but this is high-level wealth management. It is not some street hustle. I bought this house. I pay the mortgage, therefore I keep the house. It is basic economics." Jamal tightened his grip on the papers. "The law does not care about your massive ego, Derek. If you try to hide marital assets, the family courts will absolutely tear your life apart. I investigate hidden money for a living. I have seen guys exactly like you lose everything because they thought they were smarter than the justice system combined." Derek scoffed loudly. "Guys like me," he repeated mockingly. "You mean successful, self-made executives? Stick to crunching numbers in your little cubicle, Jamal. You people always overcomplicate things to justify your ridiculous hourly rates. Just because you have a fancy title does not mean you understand how real corporate power works. My lawyers will handle this quietly. She has no money to fight me anyway." The coded racist and classist microaggressions in Derek's voice were completely unmistakable. He resented Jamal's intelligence and professional success, constantly trying to diminish him. Susan and Amanda stood quietly in the background, validating Derek's insulting behavior with their silence. Brittany just smirked, completely clueless about the harsh legal realities Jamal was explaining. Jamal stared at Derek for a long, tense moment. The absolute disgust in his dark eyes was palpable. He slowly lowered the divorce papers and shoved them hard into Derek's chest. "You are making a massive, irreversible mistake," Jamal said quietly. "But do not come crying to me when your arrogance gets you indicted for fraud." I watched this exchange with satisfaction. Jamal was practically handing Derek a lifeline, warning him of the exact legal trap my lawyers were setting, and Derek was too blinded by his narcissism to see it. I reached down and picked up the small stack of tax documents I had come to retrieve. Silently, I walked toward the open doorway, stopping right next to Jamal. I ignored Derek, Susan, Amanda, and the foolish girl wearing my pearls. I looked into Jamal's eyes. "Thank you, Jamal," I said softly. "You are a brilliant auditor. You see the hidden details everyone else completely misses. Keep your eyes wide open in the coming weeks. You are going to need those exact forensic skills very soon, and I promise you are going to love what you find." Jamal looked at me, his expression shifting to sharp, calculated curiosity. He gave me a single respectful nod. I turned my back on the toxic room and walked out of the house for the last time, knowing my trap was set. I got into my rental car, the heavy thud of the door sealing my exit. I drove away from the manicured lawns and towering oak trees of the wealthy suburb, heading straight toward the bustling downtown district of Chicago. The adrenaline from the confrontation with Susan, Amanda, and Derek was beginning to wear off, leaving behind a sharp, focused energy. I needed strong caffeine before my upcoming meeting with the legal team. I pulled into the parking lot of an upscale artisan coffee shop, a place Derek and I used to frequent on Sunday mornings, before his corporate ego completely destroyed our marriage. I stood in line reviewing my mental checklist. When I reached the counter, the barista smiled warmly. I ordered a large black iced coffee and a warm butter croissant. "That will be $12.50, the barista said cheerfully. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out the standard blue debit card linked to the joint checking account Derek and I shared. For 7 years, household expenses were paid from this exact account. I slid the chip into the card reader and waited for the approved beep. Instead, the machine let out a harsh buzzing sound. "Decline," the bold red letters flashed across the small digital screen. I frowned slightly, feeling a sudden wave of confusion. That makes absolutely no sense, I thought to myself. I had deposited $3,000 from a freelance invoice just 2 days ago, and the baseline balance was always kept strictly around $50,000 to cover emergency home repairs. "Can you try it again?" I asked the barista politely. She nodded sympathetically and processed the transaction a second time. The harsh buzz repeated. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice dropping into an apologetic whisper. "It is declining it again." A few people standing in line behind me shifted impatiently. I pulled out my phone and quickly opened my mobile banking application. I typed in my password, bypassing the facial recognition to save time. When the account dashboard finally loaded, the numbers glaring back at me from the bright screen made my blood run instantly cold. The joint checking account balance read exactly $0.00. I quickly clicked on the transaction history tab. There it was. A single massive wire transfer initiated at 9:15 that exact morning. Derek had illegally drained exactly $50,000 from our shared account and moved it into an unknown external account. He had left me absolutely nothing. Right as I stared at the empty balance, a notification banner dropped down from the top of my phone screen. It was a text message from Derek. I tapped it open. It read, "I warned you not to mess with me. I moved all the cash. Every single penny. Good luck trying to hire a divorce lawyer with $0. Enjoy the bus ride, you broke loser." He thought this was his ultimate masterstroke. He genuinely believed that by financially freezing me out, he had paralyzed my ability to fight back. He thought I would be standing in this crowded coffee shop, humiliated, crying over a $12 pastry, forced to call him and beg for grocery money. In Illinois, draining a joint account during a divorce proceeding without court approval is a massive legal violation. Judges despise marital asset dissipation. He had just handed my legal team a massive weapon. I let out a low, genuine laugh. The sound surprised the barista, who was looking at me with deep concern. "It is totally fine," I told her, my voice brimming with a sudden sense of calm. I popped open the hidden compartment on the back of my phone case. I slid out a heavy matte black metal card. It was a high-tier corporate card, an exclusive invitation-only account tied directly to the operating funds of my tech company. It had no preset spending limit and carried more financial weight than Derek would ever see in his lifetime. I tapped the heavy metal card against the reader. The machine instantly chirped a cheerful approved tone. The barista's eyes widened slightly as she saw the sleek design of the heavy card and heard the instant approval. She handed me my printed receipt and my iced coffee. "Thank you," I said with a warm smile. "Have a wonderful day," I told her as I turned away. I took a sip of the bitter cold coffee, savoring the control I had over my reality. Derek thought he was playing a brilliant game of financial chess. He wanted to play dirty with $50,000. But I was about to crush him with $45 million. I walked out of the coffee shop fully prepared for my legal team. The crisp morning air of downtown Chicago rushed past me as I navigated the bustling sidewalks. Within 10 minutes, I stood at the base of a towering 70-story glass skyscraper. The sleek architecture reflected the morning sun, a stark contrast to the quiet suburban house I had just been thrown out of. Derek always thought my freelance copywriting was just a cute little hobby to keep me busy while he did the real work. He thought I spent my days typing up blog posts for local bakeries. He had absolutely no idea that the software platform half the corporate world used to manage those digital content publications was entirely built, owned, and operated by me. I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors and entered the massive marble lobby. Dozens of people in sharp business suits were lined up at the security desks, flashing badges and signing in as visitors. I completely bypassed the long lines. I walked straight toward a discreet, unmarked set of brushed steel elevator doors tucked away in the private VIP corridor. The head of security, a tall man named David, gave me a subtle nod as I approached. "Good morning, ma'am," he said respectfully, stepping aside. I did not need a visitor pass. I swiped my encrypted mobile device over the hidden proximity reader. The heavy steel doors immediately slid open, granting me exclusive access to the express elevator that went straight to the penthouse executive floor. As the elevator shot upward, leaving the city noise behind, I took a deep breath. My tech company was a stealth mode software as a service enterprise that specialized in automated digital content distribution. We managed the back-end infrastructure for hundreds of major media publications. We had recently completed our Series B funding round, pushing our total private valuation to $45 million. When the elevator doors finally chimed open on the top floor, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The space was bright, minimalist, and buzzing with quiet, focused energy. Rows of developers and software engineers were deeply engrossed in their workstations. A few senior executives looked up as I walked past, offering polite smiles and brief nods. They knew me simply as the founder. I pushed open the heavy oak door to my private executive office. It offered a sweeping panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. Sitting at the long glass conference table were 3 people waiting for me. At the head of the table was my lead wealth management attorney, Mr. Harrison. Beside him were 2 incredibly sharp-looking individuals in tailored suits. These were the senior partners of the most ruthless forensic accounting firm on the East Coast. "Good morning, Natalie," Mr. Harrison said, standing up to greet me. "I trust the unsealing protocol was executed to your satisfaction." I took my seat at the head of the table, placing my leather bag on the floor. "The trust is unsealed," I confirmed, keeping my voice strictly business. "When I started this company, before we even got married, I placed every single intellectual property right and equity share into an ironclad, irrevocable blind trust." Derek never bothered to ask how I funded my life because his ego demanded he be the sole provider. And we have a new development as of 9:15 this morning. Derek just drained exactly $50,000 from our joint marital checking account. He moved it to an undisclosed external account and locked me out of the primary banking portal. Mr. Harrison let out a low whistle, shaking his head. Dissipation of marital assets during an active divorce proceeding, he noted, writing something down on his legal pad. In the state of Illinois, that is a massive violation of the automatic financial injunction. Your husband is practically gift-wrapping his own federal fraud indictment. I turned my attention to the two forensic accountants sitting quietly at the table. Derek thinks he is a financial genius, I told them plainly. He told his family that I am completely financially illiterate and powerless. I want you to tear his financial life apart transaction by transaction. I want you to subpoena his employer for his total compensation packages over the last 5 years. I suspect he has been funneling his annual performance bonuses into an account under his mistress's name to avoid equitable distribution. Find out exactly where that $50,000 went today. More importantly, I want a complete historical audit of his hidden credit lines and any offshore accounts he might be using to stash marital funds. The lead accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca, gave a small, confident smile. "Consider it done," she said, opening her silver laptop. "We will track every digital footprint, every wire transfer, and every hidden shell company he has ever touched. He will not be able to hide a single penny from us." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, looking out over the city. Derek wanted to play a ruthless game of financial starvation. He wanted to watch me suffer, but he was about to learn a very hard lesson about what real corporate power actually looked like. I left the conference room feeling a profound sense of clarity. The machinery was officially in motion. For the next 3 weeks, I immersed myself entirely in my company, ignoring the barrage of hostile text messages Derek sent on a daily basis. He was growing increasingly frustrated by my absolute silence. He texted me pictures of his new expensive watch, bragging about how much money he was saving now that he did not have to support me. He even sent a photo of Brittany drinking champagne on our back patio. I did not block his number. I simply forwarded every single message and photograph directly to Mr. Harrison to add to the growing pile of evidence. While Derek was busy playing house and pretending to be a wealthy bachelor, my forensic accounting team was quietly dismantling his entire financial existence. Exactly 21 days after our initial meeting, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harrison. He did not bother with pleasantries. He simply said, "We have it. Come to the office immediately." I grabbed my coat and took the private elevator down to the waiting town car. When I walked back into the executive conference room, the atmosphere was crackling with electric anticipation. Rebecca, the lead forensic accountant, had her silver laptop connected to the large wall monitor. The screen displayed a complex web of financial transactions, corporate routing numbers, and international wire transfers. She looked incredibly satisfied, the kind of look a predator gets right before it traps its prey. "Take a seat," Natalie, Mr. Harrison said, gesturing to the chair beside him. "You were absolutely right about his employer bonuses. He has been hiding them, but the sheer scale of his stupidity is genuinely staggering." Rebecca stood up and pointed a laser pointer at the top of the digital web. "We served a highly confidential subpoena directly to the payroll department of Derek's company," she explained. "We demanded a complete breakdown of his total compensation package for the last 5 years. Derek always told you his annual bonus was capped at $20,000, which he claimed went straight into his personal retirement fund. That was a complete lie. His actual performance bonuses were averaging over $80,000 a year, but the company was not depositing those funds into your joint marital account or even his personal domestic accounts." She clicked a button on her remote, highlighting a specific node on the diagram. He instructed his payroll department to route the entirety of his bonus compensation into a third-party shell company called Apex Consulting Solutions. We pulled the registration records for Apex. It is a dummy corporation registered in Delaware, and the sole managing member of that dummy corporation is a 26-year-old woman named Brittany. I stared at the screen, letting the reality of his betrayal wash over me. It was not just the affair. It was a premeditated multi-year conspiracy to rob me of the financial security we were supposed to be building together. He had been planning an exit strategy for years, using his naive assistant to hide marital assets. But that is not even the best part. Rebecca continued, her eyes gleaming. Apex Consulting Solutions does not hold the cash. Within 48 hours of every corporate bonus deposit, the entire sum is wired internationally. She clicked the remote one last time. The screen zoomed in on a bank logo. It goes straight into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account is completely shielded, held in a private trust under Brittany's name. Over the last 5 years, Derek has successfully funneled over $300,000 of marital funds into that offshore account. He intentionally structured it this way to ensure the money would be completely invisible during a standard divorce proceeding. The room fell completely silent. The sheer arrogance of his plan was almost comical. Derek genuinely believed he was a master criminal, an untouchable corporate titan who could outsmart the legal system. He thought he could leave me destitute, while he and his mistress ran off with over $250,000 in stolen marital funds. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the glass table. "This changes everything, Natalie. This is no longer just a messy divorce. What Derek has done constitutes severe marital fraud, intentional dissipation of assets, and potentially federal tax evasion, depending on how he filed his returns. Not to mention the fact that he used his mistress as a financial mule. We can file an emergency injunction right now. We can freeze the Cayman account, notify the family court judge of the fraud, and completely destroy his legal standing before we even get to the deposition phase. Shall I draft the emergency filing today?" I looked at the complex web of lies displayed on the large monitor. I thought about Derek laughing in my face on our anniversary. I thought about Susan and Amanda raiding my closet, and Brittany wearing my late mother's pearls. I felt a cold, sharp smile slowly spread across my face. "No," I said softly. "Not yet." Mr. Harrison paused, looking at me with slight confusion. "Are you sure? We have the smoking gun right here." I nodded, keeping my eyes locked on the screen. "If we reveal this now, he will panic. He will hire better lawyers, he will claim ignorance, or he will try to pin the entire offshore scheme on Brittany. I do not want him on the defensive. I want him feeling absolutely invincible. Let him walk into that deposition room believing he has completely won. Let him swear on the Bible, on video, and on the official legal record that he has no hidden assets and no offshore accounts. Let him commit felony perjury. When the trap finally snaps shut, I want him to be the one who pulled the trigger. Let him lie under oath first." I left Mr. Harrison's office that afternoon with a profound sense of peace. I knew the exact dimensions of the battlefield, and I knew I held the ultimate winning hand. But while I was meticulously preparing my legal strategy in absolute silence, Derek's family was taking a much louder, far more desperate approach. If Derek was the architect of my financial starvation, his mother Susan and his sister Amanda were the enthusiastic generals of his public relations war. The digital smear campaign started on a Tuesday evening, exactly 3 weeks after Derek handed me the divorce papers. It began with a highly calculated, passive-aggressive post on Amanda's Facebook page. Amanda posted a picture of Derek looking exhausted but smiling bravely, sitting at the expensive kitchen island in the house I had secretly paid for. The caption was a masterpiece of toxic manipulation. It read, "So incredibly proud of my big brother. After years of carrying the entire financial and emotional weight of a completely one-sided marriage, he is finally breaking free. It is truly exhausting to watch someone you love work 80-hour weeks just to support a spouse who absolutely refuses to get a real job and contribute to the household. Here is to new beginnings and protecting your hard-earned assets from people who just want a free ride." Within minutes, Susan shared the post to her own timeline, adding her own dramatic commentary. She wrote, "A mother's intuition is never wrong. I always knew she was just using him for his paycheck. Thank goodness my son finally woke up and stopped letting himself be used as an automated teller machine. Praying for his peace of mind during this difficult transition." She then proceeded to tag over 30 mutual family members and friends, ensuring maximum visibility for her venomous lies. The notifications on my phone began to light up like a slot machine. The posts were gaining traction quickly within our large circle of mutual friends, acquaintances, and extended family members in the Chicago suburbs. People who had eaten the expensive dinners I cooked, people who had drank the vintage wine I bought, were suddenly flocking to the comment sections to offer Derek their blind sympathy. They called me a gold digger. They called me a lazy parasite. Some of the bolder friends even tagged me directly in the comments, demanding to know how I could be so selfish as to demand spousal support from a man I had supposedly drained dry. By Wednesday morning, the social isolation was in full effect. I logged onto my personal social media accounts and watched my friend count plummet in real time. People I had known for 7 years were quietly unfriending and blocking me. Wives of Derek's corporate colleagues, women I had hosted for endless holiday parties and baby showers, were suddenly treating me like a contagious disease. Derek wanted to completely destroy my reputation, painting himself as the hardworking, victimized husband, and me as the greedy villain who contributed absolutely nothing to our life together. He was laying the groundwork to ensure that when he left me with nothing, our social circle would cheer for him instead of questioning his cruelty. I was sitting in my downtown executive office reviewing the wire transfer logs from the Cayman Islands account when my personal cell phone buzzed loudly against the glass desk. The caller ID showed the name Patricia. Patricia was a wealthy, influential woman in our suburban social circle. She had always been close with Susan, but she and I had spent hours together organizing local charity events. I picked up the phone expecting a tense but civilized conversation. "Hello, Patricia," I said politely. She did not bother saying hello. "Natalie, I am calling because I am absolutely appalled," Patricia snapped, her voice trembling with self-righteous anger. "I just saw what Susan posted, and I spoke to Derek this morning. I cannot believe you are trying to take half of that poor man's house after he worked so hard to provide for you. You have not held a steady corporate job the entire time you have been married. How can you sleep at night knowing you are trying to ruin him financially just because he finally realized he deserves an equal partner?" I listened to her furious breathing on the other end of the line. A month ago, this accusation would have shattered me. I would have desperately tried to explain myself, to defend my freelance work, to beg her to see my side of the story. But sitting in my executive office looking at the irrefutable proof of Derek's massive offshore fraud, Patricia's anger felt incredibly small and pathetic. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. "Patricia, I appreciate your concern for Derek," I said, my voice completely smooth and detached. "I understand that the story he is telling sounds very convincing right now, but I am not going to debate this with you over the phone." Patricia scoffed loudly. "Because you have no defense, Natalie. You are just trying to take his money." I smiled, looking out at the city skyline. "I do not need a defense, Patricia. The truth has a very strict timeline. Just wait." I ended the call before she could say another word. I ended the call. Placing my smartphone face down on the cool glass surface of my desk, I returned my complete focus to the actual battlefield. Petty social media gossip was entirely irrelevant when massive federal bank fraud was sitting right in front of me. 2 days later, the next phase of Derek's ridiculous strategy officially began. A thick courier envelope arrived at Mr. Harrison's downtown office. It contained the initial settlement proposal from Derek's legal representation. Derek had certainly not hired a high-powered corporate litigation firm. Because he genuinely believed I was entirely broke and helpless, he hired a discount divorce attorney who operated out of a suburban strip mall. Mr. Harrison immediately summoned me to his office to review the document together. When I sat down in the leather guest chair and read the proposed terms, I had to physically cover my mouth to stop myself from laughing out loud. The settlement offer was an absolute masterclass in financial gaslighting. Derek was generously offering to let me keep my 9-year-old Honda Civic. He also agreed to waive his imaginary right to spousal support from my freelance copywriting income. In exchange for these incredible concessions, his lawyer demanded that I assume full legal responsibility for exactly $80,000 in what they officially labeled as joint marital credit card debt. I flipped past the legal jargon to the attached financial exhibits at the back of the packet. The credit card statements provided a meticulous, highly detailed timeline of his 8-month-long infidelity. I ran my index finger down the long columns of printed transactions. There were massive charges for a luxury ski resort in Aspen, Colorado. There were receipts for incredibly expensive dinners at exclusive Michelin star restaurants downtown. There were multiple thousands of dollars spent at high-end designer boutiques on Michigan Avenue. I stopped at a specific charge dated just 3 months prior. It was a transaction for a $12,000 diamond tennis bracelet purchased from a boutique jeweler. I looked up at Mr. Harrison. Derek bought this exact diamond bracelet for his assistant Brittany while I was out of state visiting my sick aunt, I explained calmly. He financed his entire secret affair using a high-limit joint credit card that I never even used. And now he expects the family court to force me to pay the bill for his mistress's luxury lifestyle. Mr. Harrison looked at the poorly drafted paperwork with absolute professional disgust. This is a standard intimidation tactic used by very cheap lawyers, he explained, tossing the packet back onto his desk. They throw a massive, terrifying financial burden at you right out of the gate. They hope you will panic cry and desperately beg to negotiate for a lesser amount. It is designed to completely distract you from fighting for the real marital assets like the equity in your home and his corporate retirement funds. Do you want me to draft a standard counteroffer? Absolutely not, I replied instantly, my voice completely firm. Reject it outright. Do not offer him a single cent and do not provide any explanation for the rejection. Tell his strip mall lawyer that we will simply see them at the mandatory deposition next week. The swift, uncompromising rejection notice hit the inbox of Derek's attorney later that same afternoon. Derek did not handle the absolute defiance well. He expected me to be a terrified victim begging for mercy. By 6 o'clock that evening, my personal cell phone vibrated heavily against the kitchen counter of my luxury hotel suite. I looked at the glowing screen. It was a voicemail from Derek. I pressed play, placing the phone on speaker so I could listen to his unhinged anger echo through the quiet room. "You are making the biggest mistake of your miserable life, Natalie." His voice blasted through the speaker, thick with uncontrollable rage. "I offered you a very generous way out. I was trying to be a nice guy by letting you keep your stupid car instead of selling it to pay down the debt you owe me. But since you want to play hardball with money, you do not even have the gloves, are officially off. I'm going to bury you in legal fees. My lawyer is going to drag this divorce out for years until you are completely bankrupt and broken. You are going to end up homeless on the streets of Chicago, begging me to take you back or give you a settlement. You are a delusional, useless leech, and I will make absolutely sure that you walk away from this marriage with nothing." The message ended with a sharp beep. I smiled and forwarded the audio recording directly to Mr. Harrison for our files. The trap was now perfectly set for the upcoming legal deposition, and I was entirely ready to watch him completely destroy his own future under oath. The morning of the deposition arrived with a heavy gray sky over downtown Chicago. I walked into the rented conference room 15 minutes early. Mr. Harrison was already there, calmly organizing his pristine files. A professional videographer was busy setting up a camera on a tripod at the far end of the room. Today was about letting Derek dig his own grave on the official legal record. Mr. Harrison gave me a brief, reassuring nod as I took my seat. "Remember our strategy," he said quietly. "Do not react to anything they say. Let them talk. Let his massive ego do all the heavy lifting." Exactly at 9 o'clock, the heavy glass door swung open. Derek swaggered into the room. He was wearing a brand-new custom-tailored navy blue suit. He shot his cuffs as he walked, making sure his expensive silver watch caught the fluorescent light. Right behind him was his discount strip mall lawyer, a loud man named Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson was carrying a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better decades, and his suit was noticeably wrinkled. Derek stopped at the edge of the table and looked me up and down. I had intentionally dressed down for the occasion. I was wearing a simple, inexpensive beige cardigan and plain black slacks. My hair was tied back in a modest ponytail. I looked exactly like the helpless broke woman he desperately wanted me to be. "Is that what you are wearing to your own legal execution?" Derek mocked, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "I guess you really could not afford to buy anything new since I froze the accounts. You should have taken the settlement offer I sent Natalie. Now you are just going to sit here and humiliate yourself on camera." Mr. Harrison did not even look up from his legal notepad. "Please take your seat so we can begin on the record," he said in a completely flat tone. Derek scoffed loudly, pulling out a chair and aggressively sitting down. Mr. Peterson sat next to him, opening his messy briefcase and pulling out a disorganized stack of papers. The court reporter asked Derek to stand and raise his right hand. Derek confidently swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, completely unaware that he was permanently sealing his own fate. Mr. Peterson immediately took control of the room, or at least he thought he did. He leaned aggressively across the table, pointing a cheap pen directly at me. "Let the record show that we are here to discuss the equitable distribution of marital assets, or rather the complete lack thereof on the part of the petitioner." He began, his voice booming loud. "My client, a highly successful corporate executive, has been the sole financial pillar of this marriage. Meanwhile, your client has spent the last 7 years engaging in a completely unprofitable hobby." Mr. Harrison sat perfectly still. He did not object to the hostile tone. He simply steepled his fingers together and watched. "Let us talk about this freelance copywriting business, Mr. Peterson continued, practically sneering at the word business. "My client has provided bank statements showing that your income barely covered the cost of your own groceries. You sit at home typing articles while my client goes out and earns the real corporate money that paid for the mortgage, the luxury vehicles, and the high-end lifestyle you so selfishly enjoyed. Is it not true that my client frequently had to bail you out of debt because your typing hobby failed to generate a livable wage?" Derek leaned back in his chair, looking incredibly pleased with himself. "That is absolutely correct," Derek chimed in, turning to look directly at the camera. "I carried her financially for our entire marriage. She refused to get a real job. She just wanted to play on her laptop all day while I did all the heavy lifting. I am the only reason she did not end up living on the streets." It was a masterful display of gaslighting. They were painting a vivid picture of a long-suffering, hard-working husband anchored to a lazy, entitled wife. Mr. Peterson continued his aggressive monologue for over 45 minutes, belittling my intelligence, mocking my work ethic, and insisting that the court should award Derek everything to compensate him for the sheer burden of supporting me. Throughout the performance, Mr. Harrison did not utter a single word of protest. He let Derek talk. He let Derek brag extensively about his salary, his crucial role at his company, and his complete financial dominance over our household. Every arrogant boast, every exaggerated claim of financial superiority was being meticulously recorded on high-definition video. They thought Mr. Harrison was quiet because he was completely intimidated by Mr. Peterson's courtroom tactics. They had absolutely no idea that my brilliant attorney was simply letting the prey walk willingly into the center of the trap before slamming the door completely shut. After nearly an hour of Mr. Peterson grandstanding and Derek basking in his own fabricated glory, my attorney finally leaned forward. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, picked up a single sheet of paper from his pristine desk space, and looked directly at Derek. His voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the theatrics Mr. Peterson had just displayed. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Peterson has certainly painted a vivid picture of your household dynamics, Derek. Now, for the official record, I just have a few brief clarifying questions regarding the financial affidavit you submitted to this court last week." Derek smirked, crossing his arms confidently over his chest. "Go ahead," he replied, exuding total arrogance. I have absolutely nothing to hide. My finances are an open book. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. Excellent. Let us begin with the primary marital residence. On page 4 of your affidavit, you claim full ownership of the property valued at $1.2 million. You state that you alone provided the initial down payment and made every single monthly mortgage payment from your personal earnings. Is that correct? Derek did not hesitate. That is 100% correct, he stated proudly, looking right into the camera lens. Natalie never contributed a single dime to that house. I paid the down payment from my savings and my salary covered every mortgage bill for 7 years. She just lived there for free. I kept my facial expression neutral. My internal organs were doing backflips, but I did not show an ounce of emotion. Derek was officially claiming sole financial responsibility for a house that was purchased using a massive wire transfer from my tech company accounts. Mr. Harrison made a small check mark on his paper. Understood. Now let us move to your liquid assets. According to this sworn document, your total combined checking and savings balance across all banking institutions is exactly $12,000. This seems rather low for an executive pulling in your reported salary. Can you confirm that $12,000 represents the absolute entirety of your current cash assets? Mr. Peterson scoffed loudly. Asked and answered counsel. My client has significant overhead costs. He has been financially supporting a dependent spouse paying property taxes and managing marital debt. $12,000 is what remains after being drained by your client. Mr. Harrison ignored the interruption completely, keeping his eyes locked on Derek. I need a verbal confirmation from the deponent. Is $12,000 your total liquid net worth as of today? Derek leaned into the microphone. Yes. $12,000 is all I have to my name right now. Mr. Harrison flipped to the very last page of the document. Thank you. Now I will ask you one final critical question, Derek. I want to remind you that you are currently under oath, subject to the severe penalties of perjury. Have you at any point during the last 5 years transferred gifted or hidden any marital funds, bonuses, or assets into any external accounts, offshore trusts, or third-party holdings to avoid equitable distribution in this divorce? The room fell completely silent. Even Mr. Peterson stopped shuffling his messy papers. This was the moment of truth. Derek had a split second to save himself. He could have claimed ignorance or admitted to moving a small amount of money out of anger. But his massive ego simply would not allow him to show weakness. Absolutely not, Derek declared, his voice ringing with defensive indignation. I have never transferred a single penny of marital funds to anyone. I do not have any secret accounts or offshore trusts. That sounds like some ridiculous movie plot. I work hard for my paycheck, and what you see on that affidavit is exactly what exists in reality. Nothing more. Mr. Harrison smiled. It was a very small, incredibly dangerous smile. He slid the financial affidavit across the long glass table, stopping it right in front of Derek. He handed him a sleek silver pen. Then please sign and date the bottom of page 12, Mr. Harrison instructed smoothly. By signing this, you swear under penalty of perjury that all financial disclosures provided today are entirely accurate and complete. Derek did not even bother to reread the pages. He snatched the silver pen, scribbled his signature aggressively on the dotted line, and pushed the document back across the table with a triumphant sneer. There, Derek said. We are done here. Now tell your client to pack up her pathetic bags and get ready for a total loss. Mr. Harrison carefully placed the signed affidavit into a clear plastic sleeve. We are indeed done here, Mr. Harrison replied softly. I watched Derek stand up and button his suit jacket, practically glowing with victory. He genuinely believed he had just outsmarted my legal team. But as I looked at his messy signature drying on the official court document, a profound sense of satisfaction washed over me. He had just formally lied to a judge on video. He explicitly denied the existence of the Cayman Islands account and the dummy corporation. He had just signed a legally binding document that would ultimately send him to federal prison. The steel jaws of the trap had officially snapped shut. The perjury was permanently locked in. I stood up from the conference table, smoothing out the front of my plain beige cardigan. Mr. Harrison calmly gathered his documents, sliding the freshly signed affidavit into his leather briefcase. Derek was already halfway out the door, laughing loudly at something his cheap lawyer, Mr. Peterson, had said. Amanda and her husband Jamal had been sitting quietly in the small waiting area, just outside the glass doors, having come along to offer Derek their unwavering family support. As we exited the room, Mr. Harrison stopped at the reception desk to validate his parking ticket. Jamal was standing nearby. Jamal is a senior forensic auditor. His entire career is built on noticing the tiny hidden details that other people completely ignore. As Mr. Harrison placed his leather portfolio on the reception counter, Jamal's sharp eyes locked onto the thick legal notepad resting on top. He did not just see a pad of paper. He saw the faint embossed watermark stamped into the thick parchment alongside the discreet gold crest of the law firm. I watched Jamal freeze. His posture stiffened and his eyes darted from the legal pad up to Mr. Harrison's tailored suit, taking in the bespoke stitching and the luxury watch partially hidden under his cuff. I walked past them, heading straight for the elevators, but I deliberately slowed my pace. The hallway was quiet enough for me to hear exactly what happened next. Jamal quickly grabbed Derek by the arm, pulling him away from the elevator banks and toward a quiet corner of the lobby. Amanda followed them, looking annoyed by the sudden detour. Derek yanked his arm away, glaring at Jamal. "What is your problem?" Derek snapped, adjusting his custom suit jacket. "We just won. Did you see her in there?" She barely said a word. "She is completely terrified." Jamal shook his head, looking at Derek with a mixture of absolute disbelief and genuine pity. "You did not win anything." "Derek," Jamal said, his voice a harsh, urgent whisper, "do you have any idea who that lawyer is? Did you even bother to read the name of his firm on the documents you just signed?" Derek rolled his eyes dismissively. "Who cares? He is probably some bottom-feeding public defender she found online or some pro bono charity caseworker. She has $0, Jamal. She cannot afford real legal representation." "She is not using a charity worker," Jamal hissed, stepping closer to Derek. "That is Arthur Harrison. He is a senior partner at Vanguard and Sterling. They are the most expensive corporate litigation and wealth management firm in the entire state of Illinois. They do not handle simple suburban divorces, Derek. They handle high-net-worth asset protection and billion-dollar corporate mergers. Their absolute minimum retainer fee is $100,000 just to walk through the front door." Amanda scoffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively. "Oh, please, Jamal. Stop being so dramatic. You are always overthinking everything. Natalie does not have $100,000. She probably just maxed out a bunch of secret credit cards to hire him, or maybe she is sleeping with him to pay off the bill." Jamal looked at his wife, completely appalled by her sheer ignorance. "You cannot pay a firm like that with credit cards, Amanda. And they definitely do not take charity cases. If Arthur Harrison is sitting in that room, it means Natalie has access to serious, untouchable capital. She is holding a massive trump card, and you two are treating this like a joke. Derek, what exactly did you just swear to on that video recording? Tell me you did not lie about your assets." Derek let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed down the marble hallway. "You are incredibly paranoid, Jamal. You auditors see shadows everywhere. Let me tell you exactly what is happening. Natalie is desperately trying to bluff. She probably begged her parents for an early inheritance or took out a massive personal loan just to intimidate me. It is a pathetic scare tactic. My lawyer completely destroyed them in there today." Harrison did not even object once. "He knows they have absolutely no case against me." Jamal stared at Derek, the realization completely washing over him. He realized that Derek was entirely blinded by his own raging narcissism. "Harrison did not object because he was letting you dig your own grave," Jamal said quietly, his voice laced with dread. He let you talk because you were handing him the rope to hang you with. You need to call your lawyer right now and amend that affidavit before this goes to trial." Derek stepped right into Jamal's personal space, his face twisted in an ugly, arrogant sneer. "I am not amending anything, and I am sick of you questioning my intelligence. Stick to your boring spreadsheets, Jamal. Leave the high-stakes legal maneuvering to the real executives. I know exactly what I am doing." I stepped into the waiting elevator, pressing the button for the lobby. As the heavy steel doors began to slide shut, I caught one last glimpse of Jamal. He was standing alone in the hallway, watching Derek and Amanda walk away laughing. Jamal ran a hand over his face, looking completely exhausted and deeply terrified for the family he had married into. He was the only one who realized the train was coming, and they were all standing right on the tracks. I smiled as the elevator descended. Jamal was absolutely right, but his warning came way too late. Exactly 2 weeks after the deposition, Derek decided to publicly celebrate what he believed was his impending financial victory. He sent out digital invitations for a massive freedom party to be held at the marital home on a Saturday night. Thanks to a few mutual friends who had quietly remained neutral, screenshots of the invitation landed directly in my inbox. The sheer audacity of hosting a divorce party in the very house I had secretly purchased was staggering. But it presented the perfect opportunity for the next phase of our legal strategy. Mr. Harrison needed to serve the next round of highly sensitive legal documents, and doing it publicly would prevent Derek from claiming he never received them. I decided to personally escort the process server. I pulled my rental car onto the street, parking several houses down, because my own driveway was completely blocked by luxury sport utility vehicles and expensive imported sports cars. The loud, pulsing bass of electronic dance music vibrated through the crisp evening air. Through the large front windows, I could see dozens of people drinking, laughing, and mingling under the expensive crystal chandeliers I had personally selected. It was a grotesque display of premature celebration funded entirely by stolen marital assets. I walked up the driveway with the process server, a tall, heavily built professional named Richard, trailing just a few steps behind me, holding a thick stack of manila envelopes securely in his hands. I did not bother knocking. I reached into my purse, pulled out my original brass key, and unlocked the heavy front door. I pushed it wide open and stepped into the grand foyer. The massive house was absolutely packed with Derek's corporate colleagues, suburban socialites, and extended family members holding crystal champagne flutes. Right in the center of the massive living room stood Derek, holding court like a conquering king. He had his arm wrapped tightly around Brittany's waist. She was wearing a completely inappropriate skin-tight red cocktail dress, but what immediately caught my eye was the massive glittering rock sitting heavily on her left ring finger. It was a pristine diamond engagement ring, easily worth $40,000, sparkling brightly under the recessed lighting. Derek had actually proposed to his mistress while he was still legally married to me. As I walked further into the living room, a few people near the entryway noticed me. Whispers began to ripple rapidly through the crowd. Someone frantically tapped the shoulder of the private disc jockey hired for the evening. The loud thumping music was abruptly cut off, plunging the crowded room into a sudden, highly uncomfortable silence. The abrupt quiet was deafening. All eyes turned toward me. Derek finally looked up from his conversation, his smug smile instantly transforming into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Brittany gasped loudly, instinctively, covering the massive diamond ring with her right hand, as if I was going to rip it right off her finger in front of everyone. Before Derek could even manage to open his mouth to scream at me, his mother launched herself through the crowd. Susan stomped toward me, her face flushed dark red with expensive wine and absolute uncontrollable rage. She was wearing a ridiculous sequined dress that caught the light aggressively as she marched across the hardwood floor. "What on earth are you doing here?" Susan shrieked, her shrill voice echoing loudly in the silent, crowded house. "You were not invited to this party. You do not belong in this house anymore. Everyone is staring at you." She did not even give me a single chance to respond. Susan lunged forward and shoved both of her hands violently against my shoulders, trying to physically push me backward toward the open front door. "You are a pathetic, jealous, bitter woman," she yelled, shoving me a second time much harder. "I can see you staring at her beautiful new ring. Get out of my son's house right now before I call the police and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs. Do not ruin this special night for my family." I stumbled back half a step but quickly regained my footing. I did not raise my hands to fight back. I simply looked down at Susan with absolute freezing contempt and a steady smile. The entire room was watching us intently, completely paralyzed by the sudden physical violence. I brushed my hands over my cardigan where Susan had just pushed me, calmly adjusting my posture. "I am still legally listed on the primary deed to this property." "Susan," I said, my voice completely calm and carrying perfectly across the silent room. "If you ever lay your hands on me one more time, I will personally have you arrested for assault before the caterers even bring out the dessert." Susan froze completely. My sheer authority rooted her feet to the hardwood floor. Her mouth opened and closed silently, but she did not take another step. The threat of police intervention at her party shattered her momentum. Derek finally snapped out of his shocked paralysis. He angrily pushed his way through the crowd of silent guests, his face flushed with severe embarrassment and deep fury. He stepped in front of his mother, trying to reclaim his position as the alpha. He pointed an accusatory finger right at my face. "Are you insane?" Derek demanded loudly, his voice trembling. "You break into my house during a private event, just to threaten my mother. I told you to stay away. We are done playing these pathetic games with you, Natalie. I am calling the police right now and having you legally removed for trespassing." I did not flinch. I did not match his frantic energy. "I am not here to play games, Derek," I said evenly, holding my ground. "And you do not need to call the police because I am already leaving. I simply came to ensure you received a very important message." I took a deliberate step to my right, completely clearing the pathway. I gestured toward the heavily built man behind me. Richard, the professional process server, stepped forward into the bright light of the massive crystal chandelier. He looked completely unbothered by the dramatic audience surrounding us. He had a specific job to do, and he was exceptionally good at it. "Are you?" Derek Thomas Richard asked, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute legal authority. Derek looked at Richard, his arrogant facade slipping just a tiny fraction. "Who exactly wants to know?" he snapped defensively, trying to sound tough. Richard did not waste time with pleasantries or arguments. He looked down at the photograph securely clipped to his clipboard, then looked back up directly at Derek. "You have been officially identified," Richard stated flatly. He thrust a thick, heavy manila envelope directly into Derek's chest. Derek instinctively brought his hands up to catch the package before it fell to the floor. "You have been served." The heavy envelope landed with a solid smack against Derek's custom suit jacket. He looked down at it, profound confusion washing over his arrogant features. "What is this absolute garbage?" Derek muttered, tearing at the thick paper flap with aggressive, jerky movements. "It is probably just another desperate settlement plea from your cheap discount lawyer." I watched him pull out the thick stack of premium legal documents. The pristine white papers were neatly bound with a heavy black clip. As his eyes rapidly scanned the bold, capitalized text printed at the very top of the first page, the arrogant smirk completely vanished from his face. It was entirely replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. All the warm color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly pale white. He was not reading a settlement plea. He was looking at a massive federal subpoena. Right below his name, printed in large, bold letters, were the terrifying words, "Comprehensive Forensic Audit." The legal document formally notified him that his corporate employer had been legally subpoenaed to surrender all confidential payroll records, secret bonus structures, and executive compensation history for the past 5 consecutive years. The second page detailed a mandatory federal freeze on his primary banking accounts, pending a full invasive investigation into marital asset dissipation and potential tax fraud. Derek's hands actually began to shake visibly. The heavy papers rustled loudly in the completely silent room. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with sudden absolute terror. "What did you do?" he whispered hoarsely, completely forgetting about the large crowd of important people watching his sudden public collapse. Before I could answer him, Richard turned his professional attention to the young blonde woman standing frozen next to Derek. "Are you Brittany Evans?" Richard asked loudly. Brittany looked exactly like a deer caught in the headlights. She nodded slowly, far too terrified to speak a single word. Richard handed her a second equally thick manila envelope. "You have also been officially served," Richard said. He turned around and walked out the open front door without another word, his job perfectly executed. Brittany frantically tore open her heavy envelope. She let out a sharp, genuine gasp as she read the formal cover page. It was a strict legal summons demanding her immediate presence at a deposition regarding her active involvement with a dummy corporation called Apex Consulting Solutions. It also detailed the immediate legal freeze placed on her offshore banking account located in the Cayman Islands. The ultimate secret was officially exposed. Derek stared at the paper in his trembling hands, finally realizing his financial life was entirely ruined. Derek stared at the paper in his trembling hands, finally realizing his financial life was entirely ruined. The silence in the massive living room was absolute. You could hear the faint mechanical hum of the kitchen refrigerator from all the way across the house. Over 50 guests, including Derek's senior managers, wealthy neighbors, and extended family members, were watching us with wide eyes. Nobody dared to take a sip of their champagne. Nobody even dared to whisper. Derek could not speak. He just kept staring down at the comprehensive forensic audit notice, his eyes darting frantically across the black ink, as if hoping the terrifying words would magically rearrange themselves into a joke. I did not give him a single second to recover his composure. I turned my complete, undivided attention to the young blonde woman standing frozen right next to him. Brittany was holding her own legal envelope, her hands shaking so violently that the heavy paper continuously rustled in the quiet room. I took a slow, highly deliberate step toward her. She instinctively shrank back, bumping hard into Derek's shoulder. "I am not going to hurt you, Brittany," I said, keeping my voice incredibly pleasant and entirely conversational. "I just wanted to get a much closer look at that beautiful piece of jewelry you are wearing tonight." Derek suddenly snapped out of his paralyzed state. He tried to step awkwardly between us, but his movements were incredibly uncoordinated, driven entirely by blind panic. "Stop it right now, Natalie." Derek croaked, his voice completely stripped of its usual arrogant, booming confidence. "Just leave her alone. Get out of my house." I completely ignored his pathetic command. I stepped gracefully around him and stopped right in front of Brittany. She was clutching her left hand tightly against her chest, desperately trying to conceal the massive diamond ring from my view. I reached out and gently but firmly took hold of her wrist. She was far too terrified and shocked to even attempt to pull away. I slowly lowered her hand, holding it up just enough so the bright, brilliant light from the expensive crystal chandelier perfectly caught the sharp facets of the enormous stone. "It really is a stunning diamond," I said loudly, carefully modulating my voice to ensure it carried to the very back of the crowded living room. Flawless clarity. Flawless. "It has to be at least 3 or 4 carats. Derek always did have incredibly expensive taste when he was spending other people's money." From the edge of the crowd, Susan finally found her voice again. "How dare you insult my son?" Susan sputtered angrily, taking a highly hesitant step forward. "He bought that gorgeous ring with his own hard-earned corporate money. You are just standing there acting jealous because he absolutely never bought you anything remotely that nice during your miserable marriage." I released Brittany's trembling wrist and turned slowly to look directly at my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law. "Oh, Susan," I said, allowing a wide, freezing cold smile to spread across my face. "I am not jealous in the slightest. In fact, I am the one who actually paid for it." A sudden, highly audible ripple of confused murmurs swept through the gathered crowd. The corporate executives and suburban socialites immediately leaned in closer, completely captivated by the unfolding drama. They were desperate to hear every single detail. I turned my gaze back to Brittany. Her face was completely devoid of any color. She looked exactly like she was about to pass out right there on the polished hardwood floor. I took one final step closer to her, ensuring the entire room was hanging on my next sentence. "Tell me something, Brittany," I asked, my voice ringing crystal clear and unapologetically loud. "When Derek bought this $40,000 engagement ring for you, did he use the domestic dummy corporation account? Or did he wire the stolen marital funds directly from the secret offshore trust account ending in 4459 located in the Cayman Islands?" The entire room erupted in loud, shocked gasps. The words Cayman Islands hit the sophisticated crowd like a massive physical shockwave. Several of Derek's corporate colleagues instantly exchanged deeply alarmed, panicked looks. In their high-level executive world, sudden mentions of hidden offshore accounts, dummy corporations, and federal forensic audits meant massive corporate scandals and potential prison sentences. People instinctively began stepping backward, physically distancing themselves from Derek, as if his sudden legal crisis was a highly contagious disease. Derek let out a strangled, pathetic gasp. His knees actually buckled slightly, forcing him to grab the edge of the nearby leather sofa just to remain standing. The arrogant, untouchable vice president of sales was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified, broken man who had just been publicly exposed as a massive federal fraudster in front of everyone he desperately wanted to impress. I looked at his pale, sweating face one last time, turned on my heel, and confidently walked right out the front door, leaving his fake empire completely in ruins. I left the house party and drove back to my downtown hotel suite in complete silence. The weekend passed without a single hostile text message or arrogant voicemail from Derek. His usual barrage of digital harassment had completely ceased. By Monday morning, the silence was officially broken, but not by Derek. My phone rang just after 9 o'clock. It was Mr. Harrison. His tone was laced with dry amusement. He informed me that Mr. Peterson, Derek's discount strip mall lawyer, had frantically called his office before it even opened. Peterson was practically begging for an emergency off-the-record mediation session that very afternoon. The sheer panic in his voice confirmed exactly what we already knew. Derek was completely cornered. I arrived at Vanguard and Sterling at 2 o'clock sharp. We did not rent a neutral conference room this time. We forced them to come directly to our territory. Mr. Harrison's private executive boardroom was intimidating by design. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive polished obsidian table, and plush leather chairs. When Derek and Mr. Peterson walked through the heavy glass doors, the shift in their demeanor was absolutely staggering. Derek looked like he had not slept a single minute since the party. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin was pale, and he was wearing a visibly wrinkled gray suit. The arrogant swagger was entirely gone, replaced by the nervous, twitchy energy of a cornered animal. Mr. Peterson looked even worse. He was sweating profusely, continuously wiping his forehead with a crumpled tissue. They took their seats across from us. Nobody bothered with polite introductions or small talk. Mr. Peterson immediately opened his battered briefcase and pulled out a fresh stack of legal documents. "We are prepared to make a highly generous final settlement offer today, Mr." Peterson began, his voice lacking any of the booming aggression he used during the videotaped deposition. "My client recognizes that the previous offer may have been perceived as slightly harsh. He is willing to concede the primary marital residence to your client entirely. In addition, he is prepared to offer a lump sum cash payment of exactly $50,000 tax-free, transferred within 24 hours. Mr. Peterson slid the document across the shiny black table. Mr. Harrison did not touch it. He simply glanced down at the paper and raised a single eyebrow. "And what exactly are the required stipulations for this incredible generosity?" Mr. Harrison asked smoothly. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat nervously, avoiding my eyes. In exchange for the house and the cash, your client must immediately withdraw the federal subpoenas issued to my client's employer. She must also sign an ironclad permanent non-disclosure agreement regarding any and all financial entities, specifically including Apex Consulting Solutions and any associated international banking accounts. We want the forensic audit officially canceled today. It was a bribe, a blatant, desperate bribe wrapped in legal terminology. Derek leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He tried to muster a look of sincere concern, but his desperation bled right through the facade. Natalie. Please, Derek said, his voice dropping into a pathetic, pleading register. Just take the deal. $50,000 is a massive amount of money for you. You can start over. You can keep the house. If you let these auditors rip my life apart, I will lose my corporate job. I will go to prison. Do not do this to me over a simple misunderstanding. Just sign the paper and take the money. He genuinely thought $50,000 would blind me. He still believed I was the broke, dependent wife, who would eagerly accept his table scraps to avoid a fight. He thought he could buy his freedom and protect his offshore fortune for pennies on the dollar. I looked at Derek's bloodshot eyes. I looked at the sweating lawyer sitting next to him. Then I reached out and placed my hands firmly on the thick settlement contract resting on the table. I did not say a word. I simply gripped the top and bottom of the document, and with one swift, highly deliberate motion, I ripped the entire stack of papers perfectly in half. The loud sound of tearing paper echoed sharply in the quiet boardroom. Derek flinched physically. I stacked the torn halves together, gripped them again, and ripped them into quarters. I leaned forward and slid the destroyed pieces of paper right back across the obsidian table until they rested directly in front of Derek. I do not want your $50,000. Derek, I said, my voice completely cold and entirely unshakable, and I am absolutely not signing a non-disclosure agreement to cover up your federal crimes. The forensic audit is already active. The bank records have already been requested. You are going to sit there and watch everything you built on lies burn straight to the ground. See you in court. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving them both staring at the torn paper in absolute suffocating terror. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving them both staring at the torn paper in absolute suffocating silent terror. The heavy glass doors sealed firmly shut behind me as I took the elevator down to the lobby. By refusing his pathetic bribe, I had officially given the forensic accounting team the green light to dig past the offshore shell company and start tearing into his domestic banking history. The sheer arrogance of his actions was finally catching up to him, and the paper trail he left behind was incredibly vast and entirely undeniable. 3 days later, I was sitting in my hotel suite when Mr. Harrison called. His voice carried a sharp edge of urgency. He told me he was already in the lobby of my hotel with Rebecca, the lead forensic accountant. I told them to come up immediately. When I opened the door, neither of them was smiling. Rebecca walked straight over to the large dining table, pulled out a thick, heavily tabbed folder, and slapped it down onto the polished wood. Mr. Harrison locked the door behind him and took a seat, his expression incredibly grim. We received the subpoenaed documents from his primary domestic bank this morning, Mr. Harrison began. We were initially just looking for the transfer points he used to wire funds into the Cayman Islands Trust, but Rebecca found a massive anomaly in his debt-to-income ratio. Rebecca opened the thick folder and pulled out a stack of banking documents printed on heavy security paper. Derek did not just use his corporate bonuses to fund his affair with Brittany, Rebecca explained. His lavish lifestyle, the ski trips to Aspen, the designer bags, the $40,000 diamond engagement ring, completely exceeded his liquid cash flow. He tapped into the largest asset he had access to. To keep his mistress completely blinded by his fake wealth, he needed a massive influx of capital that his standard executive paycheck simply could not provide. I looked down at the documents. It was a dense, highly detailed loan agreement from a major national bank. The bold heading read, Home Equity Line of Credit. I frowned. That is impossible, I said. I am the primary title holder on the deed to that property. No reputable bank would authorize a second mortgage or an equity line without the explicit notarized signature of the primary deed holder. I never signed anything like this. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, pointing his gold pen at the bottom of the third page. Exactly, Natalie. Turn to the signature page. I flipped the heavy pages over. Right there, next to Derek's messy scrawl, was a signature that was supposed to be mine. It was a meticulously practiced forgery. To a careless bank loan officer, it looked legitimate enough to approve a massive line of credit. Derek had illegally leveraged the equity in the home I paid for to borrow $150,000 in cash. He forged my name, I whispered, staring at the blue ink in disbelief. He did not just hide money, he actively stole my identity to secure a federal loan. The utter betrayal was staggering. He had risked the very roof over my head just to buy expensive gifts for a woman who was actively participating in the destruction of my marriage. Rebecca nodded. He forged your signature and he used a fake notary stamp to bypass the legal verification process. We ran the notary license number. It belongs to a deceased woman. He premeditated this entire scheme. Mr. Harrison took a deep breath. This completely changes the legal landscape, Natalie. Forging a spouse's signature on a federally backed mortgage document to secure a six-figure loan is considered severe bank fraud and identity theft. By transferring those illegally obtained funds to pay for his vacations and jewelry, he committed federal wire fraud. Derek thought he was fighting a bitter divorce battle against a broke, helpless wife. He had no idea he had just handed the federal government everything they needed to put him in a concrete cell for the next 20 years. Are we legally obligated to report this immediately? I asked, feeling a very sharp sense of absolute clarity wash over my entire mind. Mr. Harrison smiled, his eyes glinting with a ruthless light. The family court judge is legally required to refer evidence of federal bank fraud to the United States Attorney's Office. We will introduce this exact document during the final courtroom showdown next week. Derek is going to walk into that courtroom expecting to fight over a house. Instead, he will walk out in federal handcuffs. The week leading up to the final hearing felt exactly like the eerie calm right before a massive hurricane makes landfall. I spent my days quietly finalizing a major software deployment for my tech company, entirely undisturbed by Derek or his toxic family. They had gone completely silent after I tore up their pathetic settlement offer. When I walked through the heavy double doors of the family court building the following Tuesday morning, I felt completely invincible. Mr. Harrison walked on my right, carrying his pristine leather briefcase, and Rebecca walked on my left, holding the heavily tabbed folder containing Derek's complete financial destruction. We entered the courtroom and took our seats at the petitioner's table. Derek was already sitting at the respondent's table with Mr. Peterson. Derek was sweating heavily, his knee bouncing nervously under the wooden table. Sitting right behind him in the public gallery were Susan and Amanda, both glaring daggers at the back of my head. The heavy wooden door behind the bench swung open, and the Honorable Judge Miller took his seat. He was a stern, no-nonsense judge with a reputation for severely punishing financial deception in his courtroom. The proceedings began with Derek taking the stand. Mr. Peterson spent the first 30 minutes trying to paint his client as the ultimate victim of a greedy, lazy spouse. Derek turned on the waterworks, literally forcing fake tears to pool in his eyes. He told the judge how he had worked 80-hour weeks to keep a roof over my head, how he was currently drowning in marital debt, and how his checking account was practically empty. He swore up and down that he had disclosed every single penny to the court. When Mr. Peterson finally finished his dramatic performance, Mr. Harrison stood up. He did not cross-examine Derek. He simply looked at the judge. "Your Honor," Mr. Harrison said smoothly, "we have no questions for the respondent at this time. However, to clarify the financial discrepancies presented today, we would like to call our first expert witness to the stand. We call Jamal Washington." A collective, highly audible gasp echoed from the gallery. I turned slightly in my chair and watched the heavy courtroom doors swing open. Jamal walked in. He was wearing an impeccably tailored dark charcoal suit, carrying a thick black binder under his right arm. He did not look at Derek. He did not look at his wife Amanda, who was suddenly gripping the wooden railing of the gallery so hard her knuckles were turning bright white. Jamal walked straight to the witness stand with his head held high. "What is the meaning of this?" Mr. Peterson sputtered, jumping to his feet. "I object, Your Honor. This man is my client's brother-in-law. He is heavily biased." Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses. He is also a senior forensic auditor with 14 years of specialized experience in corporate fraud detection. Your Honor, he was officially retained by my firm as an independent expert consultant on this case. Judge Miller overruled the objection immediately, instructing Jamal to take the oath. Jamal raised his right hand and swore to tell the absolute truth. Mr. Harrison approached the witness stand, handing Jamal a copy of Derek's sworn financial affidavit. "Mr. Washington," Mr. Harrison began, "you have reviewed the financial documents submitted by the respondent. In your expert professional opinion, are these documents an accurate representation of his financial reality?" Jamal opened his thick black binder. He looked directly at the judge. "No, Your Honor, they are not," Jamal stated, his deep voice carrying incredible authority. "The documents submitted by Derek Thomas are entirely fabricated. They represent a highly calculated, intentional manipulation of his actual assets. He has systematically omitted over $300,000 in corporate bonuses, which were deliberately funneled through a dummy corporation and wired into an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. Furthermore, the debt profile he presented today is completely fictitious, designed to hide massive personal expenditures spent entirely outside the marriage." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Derek's face turned the color of wet ash. He looked at his discount lawyer, but Mr. Peterson was busy frantically shoving papers into his briefcase, realizing his own legal license was now in severe jeopardy. Derek slumped forward in his chair, putting his head between his hands as his fake reality completely collapsed around him. But the loudest noise came from the gallery. Amanda completely lost her mind. She abruptly stood up, pointing a trembling finger at her husband. "How could you do this to your own family?" Amanda screamed at the top of her lungs, her shrill voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You are a disgusting traitor, Jamal. You are ruining my brother's life over a stupid spreadsheet. You are supposed to be on our side." Judge Miller slammed his heavy wooden gavel down onto the sounding block with a deafening crack. "Order in my courtroom," the judge roared, pointing his gavel directly at Amanda. "One more word from the gallery, young lady, and I will have the bailiff arrest you for contempt of court and throw you in a holding cell for the weekend. Sit down and remain completely silent or get out." Amanda immediately dropped back into her seat, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. Susan wrapped an arm around her, both of them, staring at Jamal with pure hatred. Jamal did not even flinch at his wife's hysterical outburst. He simply turned the page in his binder, completely disgusted by the family he had married into and fully prepared to finish dismantling Derek's fraudulent empire piece by piece. Jamal spent the next 45 minutes walking the judge through every fraudulent transaction. He presented digital wire receipts and the forged home equity loan documents. Judge Miller examined the forged signature with absolute, undisguised disgust. The legal atmosphere in the room abruptly shifted from a standard civil divorce proceeding to a highly serious criminal inquiry. Derek slouched in his wooden chair, completely defeated and physically deflated. His discount lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was rapidly wiping the thick, nervous sweat from his forehead with a crumpled tissue. Mr. Peterson knew his client was indefensible. If he did not shift the court's attention immediately, he would personally face severe professional sanctions for submitting blatantly false financial affidavits to a sitting judge. In a highly desperate pivot, Mr. Peterson jumped to his feet. He slammed his hands flat on the table, trying to muster a burst of aggressive courtroom theatrics. "Your Honor, Mr. Peterson shouted, his voice cracking slightly under the immense legal pressure. Even if we entertain these outrageous allegations of financial mismanagement by my client, the law of equitable distribution must remain entirely impartial. My client has been subjected to a highly invasive federal-level accounting audit. Yet the petitioner has completely shielded her own business assets from this court scrutiny. If my client splits his corporate bonuses, we formally demand he be awarded exactly 50% of her private business. Judge Miller looked down at Mr. Peterson over the rim of his reading glasses. "You are demanding half of the petitioner's freelance writing business?" the judge asked, his tone laced with heavy skepticism. "Yes, Your Honor," Mr. Peterson insisted loudly, puffing out his chest. "My client financially supported her for 7 years, so she could sit at home and build her little limited liability company. She operates a freelance copywriting business. Whether it is worth $1,000 or $10,000, my client is legally entitled to half of its valuation. We demand a full unsealed appraisal of her company, and we demand 50% of its total value to offset these ridiculous fraud penalties." Derek suddenly sat up much straighter. Even while staring directly down the barrel of federal prison, his innate, overwhelming greed instantly flared back to life. He leaned over and whispered frantically into Mr. Peterson's ear, nodding vigorously. Derek genuinely believed he had just found a brilliant legal loophole. He thought my tiny writing business might have a few $1,000s sitting in a basic business checking account. He wanted to take half of it just to punish me, a final petty strike to soothe his completely shattered corporate ego. Judge Miller turned his stern attention to our table. "Mr. Harrison," the judge said calmly, "does your client object to a formal valuation of her company?" Mr. Harrison stood up slowly. He meticulously buttoned his suit jacket, radiating absolute terrifying calm. He did not look angry or intimidated. He looked incredibly satisfied. "No, Your Honor," Mr. Harrison replied, his voice echoing clearly through the silent courtroom. "We have absolutely no objection whatsoever. In fact, we fully anticipated this exact demand from opposing counsel. We strongly believe in complete and total financial transparency." Mr. Peterson looked highly confused. Derek frowned deeply, his brow furrowing in sudden suspicion. They fully expected me to fight aggressively to protect my small business. They expected me to cry and beg the judge not to let Derek take my meager freelance earnings. My complete willingness to comply instantly threw them entirely off balance. Mr. Harrison reached down and picked up his heavy leather briefcase. He clicked open the brass locks and pulled out a thick, securely bound dossier sealed with bright red, tamper-evident tape. He walked confidently to the center of the courtroom and handed the heavy dossier directly to the armed court bailiff. "Your Honor," Mr. Harrison stated proudly, turning to face the judge, "my client is the sole founder and primary managing director of a technology platform registered under the corporate entity you see before you. While she did initially begin her career as a freelance copywriter, she transitioned those skills into software development several years ago. The documents contained in that sealed envelope represent the official independent corporate valuation completed just last week by a major Wall Street investment bank." The bailiff handed the sealed folder up to the judge. Mr. Peterson swallowed hard, the sound highly audible. Derek stared at the thick folder, a new wave of sickening dread washing over his face. He finally realized the woman he spent 7 years belittling was not a helpless freelancer at all. "We gladly submit the complete financial valuation of my client's company to the court," Mr. Harrison continued, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "We want the respondent to see exactly what he is demanding half of." Judge Miller took the heavy sealed folder from the armed bailiff. The entire courtroom was so quiet you could hear the harsh scrape of the red tamper-evident tape being broken. Derek leaned forward in his wooden chair, a greedy, expectant smirk slowly creeping back onto his pale face. He honestly believed he was about to be awarded half of my meager savings. He probably thought this folder contained a few bank statements showing $5,000 or $10,000. He was already mentally spending my hard-earned money to dig himself out of his massive legal hole. He even shot a quick, arrogant glance over his shoulder at his mother, Susan, who nodded back at him approvingly. Judge Miller opened the thick dossier. He flipped past the official cover letter and began reading the executive summary. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound in the massive room was the crisp rustle of heavy paper turning. The judge's expression, usually a mask of strict judicial neutrality, slowly shifted. His thick eyebrows rose high on his forehead. He flipped to the third page, running his index finger down a long column of verified financial figures. He stopped. He read the final number twice. Then slowly, Judge Miller pushed his reading glasses down the bridge of his nose and glared directly at Derek. "Mr. Peterson," Judge Miller began, his deep voice carrying a strange, dangerous resonance. "You are formally demanding 50% of the petitioner's business assets as a penalty offset. Is that still your official legal position?" "Absolutely, Your Honor." Mr. Peterson replied eagerly, stepping out from behind his table, completely oblivious to the impending disaster. "The law entitles my client to half of her freelance company. It is a marital asset, and we demand his rightful share to compensate for the emotional distress of this proceeding." Judge Miller let out a short, humorless breath. He picked up the certified valuation document and held it up for the entire room to see. This document was prepared by a highly respected Wall Street investment bank. It is a comprehensive financial audit and market valuation of the petitioner's software as a service company. The judge paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence build. As of last Tuesday, her tech company successfully closed its Series B funding round. The officially certified liquid market valuation of this supposedly little freelance writing business is exactly $45 million. The courtroom exploded. It was not just a murmur. It was a chaotic wave of absolute shock. Amanda let out a loud, strangulated gasp from the gallery. Susan grabbed the wooden railing, her face draining of all color, until she looked completely sick, her jaw hanging slack. But Derek was the main event. The arrogant, greedy smirk literally slid right off his face, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. His jaw dropped open. His eyes bugged out, staring wildly at the thick folder in the judge's hand. $45 million. The number echoed loudly in the room, completely destroying his fabricated reality. Mr. Peterson practically vibrated with sudden, intense greed. $45 million. The cheap lawyer stammered, his eyes lighting up with massive dollar signs as he mentally calculated his contingency fee. "Your Honor, in that case, we forcefully reiterate our demand. My client is legally entitled to $22.5 million of that marital asset immediately." Derek suddenly found his voice. "Yes," Derek shouted, gripping the edge of his table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Half of it is mine. She built it while we were married. I paid all the household bills so she could sit at home and build it. You owe me that money, Natalie." I sat perfectly still, radiating absolute calm. I did not even look at him. I just looked at Mr. Harrison, who was already shaking his head with a serene, predatory smile. "Sit down and be quiet," Judge Miller roared at Derek, slamming his heavy gavel hard onto the sounding block. "You are not entitled to a single penny of this woman's company." If your completely incompetent attorney had bothered to review the second page of this official document, he would know that the petitioner did not build this company with marital funds. Furthermore, the entire corporate entity, including all intellectual property equity shares and future dividends, was placed into an ironclad, irrevocable blind trust, exactly 2 years before you even signed your marriage license. The judge leaned over the high wooden bench, glaring at Derek with profound, withering disgust. This $45 million asset is legally classified as entirely premarital property. It is completely shielded from this divorce proceeding and protected by state and federal trust laws. You have zero legal claim to it. You cannot touch it, your lawyers cannot touch it, and this court cannot touch it. You spent the last 7 years mocking her career and treating her like a financial burden, completely unaware that your wife was quietly running a multi-million-dollar tech empire right under your arrogant nose. Derek collapsed back into his wooden chair, as if he had been physically struck by a heavy blow. His breathing became shallow and rapid. He realized the ultimate horrifying truth. He had thrown away a life of unimaginable wealth and security for a cheap affair and a stolen offshore bank account. He tried to ruin a woman who possessed more financial power than he could ever comprehend. His eyes darted desperately around the room looking for a way out, but there was nowhere to run. The trap was perfectly executed, and he was completely, utterly ruined. His eyes darted desperately around the room looking for a way out, but there was nowhere to run. The trap was perfectly executed, and he was completely, utterly ruined. The suffocating silence in the courtroom was suddenly broken by the sharp click of brass latches. Everyone turned toward the respondent table. Mr. Peterson, the discount suburban lawyer who had been aggressively shouting minutes ago, was now frantically throwing papers into his battered briefcase. His hands were shaking violently. The realization of what had just transpired had fully hit him. He handled petty divorce disputes, not federal bank fraud, and severe perjury. More importantly, his own legal license was hanging by a thread. He was the attorney who formally submitted Derek's fraudulent financial affidavit. He had aggressively argued for its validity on the record. If he did not distance himself from Derek right this second, he would be investigated by the State Bar Association as a willing co-conspirator to a massive federal crime. Derek looked at his lawyer with profound confusion. "What are you doing?" Derek hissed, grabbing Mr. Peterson's sleeve. "Tell the judge he is wrong. Tell him we will appeal. You have to fix this." Mr. Peterson yanked his arm away. "Do not touch me." He snapped, his voice trembling with fear and anger. "You lied to me, Derek. You sat in my office and swore you only had $12,000. You never mentioned a Cayman Islands account or forging your wife's signature on a federal mortgage document. You used my law firm to commit felony perjury." Before Derek could formulate an excuse, Mr. Peterson stood up straight. He looked up at the bench, his face completely pale and coated in nervous sweat. "Your Honor," Mr. Peterson announced, his voice echoing through the courtroom, "I must formally request immediate permission to withdraw as counsel for the respondent, Derek Thomas." Judge Miller looked down from the high wooden bench, his expression completely unreadable. "On what specific grounds are you requesting this sudden withdrawal, counselor?" the judge asked slowly. Mr. Peterson swallowed hard. "Based on the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence presented today by the petitioner's legal counsel and the expert witness, it has become abundantly clear that my client has intentionally and maliciously misled me. He has provided my office with completely fabricated financial information, which I unknowingly submitted to this court under the false assumption of its accuracy. I cannot ethically or legally continue to represent a client who has actively utilized my professional services to commit severe fraud and perjury. Continuing this representation would be a direct violation of my ethical duties as an officer of the court." The courtroom was dead silent. Even Susan and Amanda in the public gallery were completely speechless. They were watching Derek's last remaining lifeline actively cut the rope and leave him to drown. Derek jumped up from his wooden chair. "You cannot do this to me!" Derek yelled, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I paid you. You work for me. You cannot just quit in the middle of a trial." Judge Miller slammed his heavy gavel down with a deafening crack. "Mr. Thomas, you will sit down and remain completely silent," the judge roared. "Mr. Peterson is not your personal servant. He is an officer of the legal system, and you have severely compromised his professional integrity." The judge turned his stern gaze back to the sweating lawyer. "Mr. Peterson, given the unprecedented and highly criminal nature of the financial deception revealed today, your request to withdraw as counsel is officially granted. You are excused from this courtroom. I strongly suggest you retain your own legal counsel regarding the fraudulent documents your office processed." "Thank you, Your Honor," Mr. Peterson said quickly. He snapped his briefcase shut, turned on his heel and practically ran down the center aisle of the courtroom. He did not look back at Derek. He pushed through the heavy wooden double doors and disappeared into the hallway, desperate to save his own career. I watched the doors slowly swing shut. Then I looked back across the wide, polished floor of the courtroom. Derek was standing completely alone at the large respondent table. There was a vast empty space around him that felt incredibly symbolic. The cocky, arrogant corporate executive who had carelessly thrown divorce papers at me and laughed in my face on our wedding anniversary was entirely gone. He was physically, socially, and legally abandoned. He slowly sank back down into his hard wooden chair, his hands trembling as they rested on the empty tabletop. He was sitting in a silent, judgmental courtroom, finally forced to face the massive, terrifying consequences of his own toxic greed with absolutely nobody left in the world to hide behind. Judge Miller did not offer Derek a single moment of sympathy. The judge adjusted his glasses, picked up his pen, and looked down at the completely defeated man sitting alone at the respondent table. "Mr. Thomas Judge Miller," said his voice slicing through the heavy silence of the courtroom, "since you are now officially without legal representation, I am going to make this ruling incredibly simple and absolutely final. You have deliberately engaged in egregious financial fraud, perjury, and malicious dissipation of marital assets. Therefore, I am issuing an immediate summary judgment regarding the division of your civil assets." Derek stared blankly up at the bench, his breathing shallow and rapid. He did not even have the strength to argue. He just waited for the final blow. First, Judge Miller continued, his tone echoing with absolute judicial authority. "I am stripping you of any and all claims to the primary marital residence. Because you illegally forged the petitioner's signature to secure a fraudulent home equity line of credit, the house is awarded entirely to her. You have exactly 24 hours to return your keys and vacate the premises permanently. If you attempt to enter the property after tomorrow morning, you will be immediately arrested for criminal trespassing." Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. The house he had proudly bragged about, the house where he had just hosted a lavish divorce party with his mistress, was completely gone. Second, the judge read from his notes. "Regarding the $300,000 in corporate bonuses you intentionally funneled into the Cayman Islands offshore account, I am ordering full and immediate restitution. You are legally mandated to repay the entire sum directly to the petitioner. Furthermore, because of the malicious nature of your concealment, I am adding a 10% punitive interest rate to that amount. You will liquidate whatever remaining assets you actually possess to satisfy this debt." Derek gripped the edge of the wooden table. "Your Honor, I do not have that kind of money anymore," Derek pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "I spent it. The offshore account is frozen. I cannot repay $300,000. I will be completely bankrupt." Judge Miller stared at him with freezing contempt. "That sounds like a personal problem, Mr. Thomas. I suggest you find a way to pay it, or you will find yourself dealing with severe civil contempt charges on top of your impending federal indictments. And finally, because your direct actions forced the petitioner to hire highly specialized forensic accountants to uncover your massive web of lies, I am ordering you to cover her entire legal bill. You will pay the $150,000 in legal fees directly to Vanguard and Sterling within 30 days. The judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel down onto the sounding block one last time. "This civil divorce is officially finalized. I am forwarding the forged mortgage documents and the perjury evidence directly to the United States Attorney's Office for immediate federal prosecution. Court is adjourned." The sharp crack of the gavel sounded exactly like a prison door slamming shut. Derek buried his face in his hands, letting out a muffled, wretched sob. The facade of the powerful corporate executive was completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a broke, terrified criminal. I stood up from my table. I did not feel any pity for him. I felt completely light, as if a massive, suffocating weight had been permanently lifted from my shoulders. Mr. Harrison gave me a warm, respectful smile, snapping his leather briefcase shut. Rebecca nodded in quiet satisfaction. We turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom together, leaving Derek weeping alone at the defense table. As I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out into the brightly lit marble hallway, two figures immediately rushed toward me. It was Susan and Amanda. They had slipped out of the courtroom right before the judge delivered his final ruling, having witnessed the total destruction of their golden child. The realization had finally hit them. Derek was completely bankrupt and headed for federal prison. His wealth was entirely fake, their meal ticket was gone, and they were desperately terrified of the consequences. "Natalie, please wait!" Susan cried out, practically throwing herself in front of me. Her face was streaked with running mascara, and her previous arrogance was completely erased. "We are so sorry. We had absolutely no idea he was doing those terrible things to you. You have to believe us. We love you. You are family. Please do not let the judge send him to prison." Amanda nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Natalie. He is my brother. We know we said some cruel things, but we were just stressed. You have so much money now. You do not need his little bit of cash. Just tell the lawyers to drop the charges. We will do anything you want." They were begging me to save the very man they had helped abuse. They expected my forgiveness because they still thought I was the quiet, submissive girl who craved their toxic approval. I stopped walking. I looked at Susan's tear-stained face, then at Amanda's pleading eyes. I did not yell. I did not insult them. I simply looked right through them, as if they were entirely invisible. I adjusted the strap of my bag, stepped gracefully around Susan, and continued walking down the marble hallway, without uttering a single word, leaving their desperate, pathetic apologies echoing completely unanswered in the empty corridor. I adjusted the strap of my bag, stepped gracefully around Susan, and continued walking down the marble hallway without uttering a single word, leaving their desperate, pathetic apologies echoing completely unanswered in the empty corridor. The heavy clicking of my heels on the polished stone floor sounded like a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of absolute victory. I approached the massive security rotunda at the front entrance of the courthouse. The morning sunlight was streaming through the high-arched windows, casting bright geometric patterns across the lobby. Standing perfectly still near the revolving glass doors was Jamal. He had his heavy black binder tucked securely under his arm, and he was staring out at the busy downtown street, seemingly waiting for something. Or someone. I did not have to wait long to find out. The frantic clicking sound of high heels rapidly approaching from behind echoed loudly through the lobby. Gasped, completely out of breath. "You have gasped completely out of breath. You have to go back in there. You have to talk to the judge. Tell him you made a mistake on those spreadsheets. Tell him Derek was just confused. You work in finance, you know how to spin these things. Please, Jamal, Derek is going to federal prison if you do not fix this right now. You have to save my brother." Jamal did not wrap his arms around his wife. He did not offer her a single ounce of comfort. He stood as rigid as a stone pillar, looking down at Amanda with an expression of profound, chilling detachment. He reached up and slowly, deliberately peeled her frantic hands off his expensive suit jacket. "I am not spinning anything," Amanda Jamal said, his deep voice echoing clearly across the quiet rotunda. "And I am absolutely not perjuring myself to save a criminal who forged federal mortgage documents. I warned him. I warned both of you. I stood in that bedroom and told him exactly what the law would do to him, and you both laughed in my face. You called me paranoid. You let him disrespect me." Amanda stared at him, her chest heaving. "But he is family," she cried out, her voice cracking. "You are supposed to protect family." Jamal let out a short, humorless laugh. "Family?" He repeated the word, tasting like poison in his mouth. "Your family just spent the last 8 months actively destroying a good woman, stealing her assets, and committing federal wire fraud to fund a cheap affair. Your mother cheered him on. You cheered him on. You wore her stolen clothes. You mocked her while she was quietly building an empire. That is not a family, Amanda. That is a criminal syndicate, and I am completely done being associated with it." Jamal reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a crisp, sealed white envelope. It was not a thick legal dossier like the ones Derek had received, but the stark white paper looked incredibly heavy in his dark hands. He held it out toward Amanda. "What is that?" Amanda whispered, taking a highly hesitant step backward. "It is exactly what it looks like," Jamal stated flatly. "I am a licensed forensic auditor. My entire professional reputation, my career, and my freedom rely entirely on my strict ethical compliance. I refuse to be legally tied to a family of fraudsters. I refuse to let your brother's massive federal indictments bleed over into my life, my background checks, or my financial standing. I filed the paperwork yesterday afternoon. We are getting a divorce." Amanda let out a piercing, shattered wail. It was a sound of total, absolute devastation. Her knees literally buckled and she collapsed onto the hard marble floor of the courthouse lobby, clutching the white envelope against her chest. Susan, who had just caught up to us, screamed her daughter's name and rushed to her side, dropping to her knees to hold the sobbing woman. In the span of exactly 1 hour, the Thomas family had lost absolutely everything. They lost their golden child to the federal justice system. They lost the stolen wealth they so desperately worshipped. And now Amanda had just lost the only decent, hardworking, and honest man who had ever tolerated their toxic existence. Their complete collapse was entirely self-inflicted, driven by their relentless greed and their profound arrogance. Jamal looked down at the two women weeping pathetically on the floor. He did not say another word to them. He simply turned away. As he turned toward the revolving glass doors, his eyes met mine. We stood there for a brief moment, looking at each other across the bright rotunda. Jamal gave me a slow, deeply respectful nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of the brutal necessary war we had both just fought, and the absolute finality of our shared victory over their toxic manipulation. I smiled warmly and nodded back. Jamal pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the bright Chicago morning, walking away a completely free man. I took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. I walked past the crying remnants of Derek's family, pushed through the revolving doors, and stepped out into the sunshine. The warmth of the morning sun felt like a physical embrace. I walked down the courthouse steps, leaving the toxic wreckage of the Thomas family permanently behind me. But the justice system was not finished with Derek, and neither was the corporate world he worshipped. The fallout from the judge's ruling moved with terrifying speed. In the state of Illinois, family court records involving significant financial fraud are not automatically sealed. Furthermore, the subpoenas my legal team had served to Derek's employer had already sounded massive alarm bells within the executive boardrooms of his company. By Thursday morning, just 2 days after the disastrous court hearing, Derek was officially summoned to the Human Resources Department. His arrogant vice president of sales title was stripped from him in a matter of minutes. The company executives were furious. Derek had used their corporate payroll system to funnel money into a fraudulent dummy corporation to hide assets. To protect their own liability and public reputation, they fired him immediately with cause. He was denied any severance package, escorted out of the glass building by armed security guards, and permanently blacklisted from the industry. The high-powered corporate identity he used to belittle my freelance work was completely obliterated. However, losing his job was the beginning of his nightmare. Judge Miller had kept his promise. The evidence of the forged home equity loan and the perjury committed on video had been directly forwarded to the United States Attorney's Office. Federal prosecutors do not waste time when presented with neatly packaged evidence of bank fraud. On Friday afternoon, 2 federal agents arrived at the cheap suburban motel where Derek was temporarily staying. They did not arrest him, but they handed him a formal target letter. The letter notified him that he was the primary subject of a federal criminal investigation, carrying a maximum penalty of 30 years in federal prison. Derek was completely cornered. His bank accounts were frozen or completely drained to pay the court-ordered legal fees and restitution. His family completely shattered by Jamal's sudden departure, and their own public humiliation could not offer him a single dime. His mother Susan had practically mortgaged her own retirement to keep up appearances, and Amanda was dealing with her own messy divorce. Derek had absolutely nobody left to turn to, except the one person he thought he had successfully protected. He needed Brittany. Brittany was the sole managing member of Apex Consulting Solutions. While the Cayman Islands account was officially frozen by the court, Derek knew there was a secondary domestic holding account connected to her name that held roughly $20,000 in cash. It was the emergency fund he had set up for their lavish weekends. Desperate to hire a federal criminal defense attorney, Derek took an Uber to Brittany's upscale downtown apartment. He planned to convince her to transfer the remaining cash and stick by his side while they fought the federal charges together. He rode the elevator up to the 12th floor, his hands shaking as he repeatedly tried calling her cell phone. The automated voice simply stated the number was no longer in service. Derek walked down the hallway and knocked frantically on her door. There was no answer. He banged harder, his voice echoing loudly. The door next to Brittany's opened, and an annoyed neighbor poked his head out. "You are wasting your time," the neighbor said dryly. She packed her bags and moved out in the middle of the night on Wednesday, left the door wide open and threw the keys on the kitchen counter. Derek pushed past the neighbor and turned the brass handle. The apartment door swung open effortlessly. The place was completely stripped bare. Every designer handbag, every piece of expensive jewelry, and every single item of value Derek had purchased for her with stolen money was entirely gone. Sitting alone on the bare kitchen island was a single crumpled piece of paper. It was the legal summons my process server had handed her at the divorce party. Brittany had attended the party because she loved the illusion of wealth. But the moment federal subpoenas and frozen bank accounts entered the picture, she realized Derek was a sinking ship. She had immediately driven to the local bank branch, legally emptied the remaining $20,000 from the domestic holding account under her name, and vanished without a trace. She left absolutely no forwarding address and completely disconnected her phone. Derek stood alone in the empty, silent apartment, staring at the crumpled legal summons. He had sacrificed his marriage, his home, his career, and his absolute freedom for a woman who did not hesitate to rob him blind and abandon him the very second the money stopped flowing. He was officially, completely, and entirely alone. He was officially, completely, and entirely alone. While Derek sat in that empty apartment surrounded by the ruins of his own massive ego, my life was moving forward with incredible, unstoppable momentum. I did not spend a single second dwelling on his ultimate downfall. I had much larger, far more important things to focus on. Exactly 2 months after the final gavel fell in Judge Miller's courtroom, my tech company reached its absolute pinnacle. The successful Series B funding round had attracted the attention of a massive global software conglomerate. They made an aggressive, highly lucrative acquisition offer that my board of directors simply could not refuse. The days of hiding in the shadows were officially over. We finalized the sale of my stealth mode startup on a crisp Tuesday morning. I sat at the head of a massive mahogany table in a downtown high-rise surrounded by my brilliant development team and my steadfast legal counsel, Mr. Harrison. I picked up a heavy gold pen and signed my name on the final line of the acquisition contract. In that single quiet moment, I officially secured generational wealth. My personal payout from the sale was absolutely staggering, far exceeding the initial $45 million valuation. I was no longer just financially independent. I was entirely untouchable, backed by resources that guaranteed I would never have to answer to anyone ever again. I did not stay in the suburban marital home. That house was nothing but a physical reminder of a life I was completely finished playing a part in. I sold it to a lovely young couple and used a small fraction of my new wealth to purchase a stunning multi-level penthouse located right in the heart of downtown Chicago. The penthouse featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows, offering panoramic sweeping views of the vibrant city skyline and the deep blue waters of Lake Michigan. The space was bright open and filled with custom art and modern furniture. There were no ghosts of my past here. There were no toxic mother-in-laws offering passive-aggressive insults, no entitled sisters plotting my downfall, and absolutely no arrogant husbands mocking my ambition. I stood on my expansive private terrace with a glass of expensive vintage champagne, feeling the cool evening wind brush against my face. The city lights sparkled below me like millions of tiny diamonds. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the absolute, undeniable sweetness of pure freedom. The ultimate revenge against toxic, abusive people is not found in screaming matches or endless arguments. It is not found in desperately trying to prove your worth to people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. The greatest, most devastating revenge is simply moving forward in complete silence and living an incredibly beautiful life without them. Derek and his family spent 7 years trying to shrink me down to fit their pathetic, shallow narrative. They demanded I be small so they could feel big. They mistook my quiet nature for weakness, and they mistook my patience for complete submission. They genuinely believed that whoever shouted the loudest held the most power. But real power does not need to shout. Real power works quietly in the background, building an impenetrable fortress of independence and self-reliance. When the time is right, it strikes with absolute precision. If you are currently sitting in the dark, feeling trapped by a partner or a family who constantly belittles your dreams, who manipulates your kindness, or who aggressively questions your value, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are so much stronger than the tiny box they are desperately trying to force you into. Do not let their toxic insecurities dictate your future. Start making your exit plan in absolute silence. Build your resources, guard your energy, and trust your own brilliant potential. The day will absolutely come when you get to flip the script, and the look of pure shock on their faces will be worth every single second of the struggle. You deserve to live a life where you are completely celebrated, not merely tolerated. Thank you so much for following my story to the very end. The journey from being a marginalized, underestimated wife to a powerful, independent founder was incredibly difficult, but I would not change a single step of it. If my journey resonated with you, or if you have ever had to quietly gather your strength to escape a highly toxic environment, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to hear from you. Tell me your own stories of sweet karma and unexpected new beginnings in the comments section below. Let us continue to build a strong community of people who refuse to be undervalued. Remember, your peace is your ultimate power, and your best chapters are still waiting to be written. The power of silent strategy. When dealing with toxic or manipulative individuals, our immediate instinct is often to loudly defend ourselves. It is incredibly natural to want to prove your worth, correct false narratives, and demand respect when you feel misunderstood. While that emotional reaction is entirely valid, the story of Natalie and Derek grounds us in a much sharper, more liberating reality. True power moves in silence. The most profound lesson woven throughout this saga is that you do not need to attend every argument you are invited to. Derek and his family thrived on drama, ego, and public validation. They actively mistook Natalie's quiet demeanor for weakness and her patience for submission. However, instead of exhausting her energy trying to convince them of her value, she channeled it into building an impenetrable fortress of financial and personal independence.